I keep coming back to a very specific, almost hauntingly quiet scene from this week. It wasn't the loudest argument in the city, nor was it the most explosive confrontation. It was simply Valentine Cassadine having a deeply emotional, hushed conversation with his daughter, Charlotte. Something about that moment stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind long after the screen faded to black. On the surface, it looked exactly like a man who was finally exhausted, a man who was slowly uncurling his tightly clenched fists and accepting the bleak, unforgiving fate that the universe had handed him. He looked utterly defeated. He sounded entirely resolved, speaking with a softness that we rarely hear from a man of his dangerous caliber. But the more I think about it, the more that sense of profound surrender feels entirely alien to the core of who Valentine Cassadine truly is. This is a man who has spent his entire existence playing three, sometimes four moves ahead of his enemies, slipping out of impossible traps, and manipulating the very fabric of reality to protect his own blood. At first, it didn't seem important, just a touching, heartbreaking father-daughter goodbye that tugged at the emotional strings. But I couldn't stop thinking about the absolute stillness in his eyes. If you ask me, that quiet acceptance is the loudest, most terrifying alarm bell ringing in Port Charles right now. We're supposed to believe that he is just letting go, surrendering to the tide. But I can't shake the feeling that behind those sorrowful, resigned eyes, a completely different, infinitely more dangerous game is being played. It is the eerie calm before a devastating, landscape-altering storm. When a Cassadine stops fighting, it usually means they have already set the final, inescapable trap. We are watching a man who desperately wants the world to believe he is a defeated king, laying down his sword upon the throne room floor, precisely so no one notices the poisoned dagger hidden in his boot. There is a terrifying brilliance to his submission, and it feels like we are merely counting down the seconds until the illusion shatters. And speaking of carefully laid traps, we have to start following the thread of what Jen Sidwell is silently orchestrating in the background. The intelligence we are piecing together points to a highly dangerous, intricately designed snare being set by Sidwell, one that threatens to pull multiple innocent lives into a bottomless abyss. Sidwell isn't just acting on raw impulse or blind rage. He is calculating every single angle, waiting patiently in the dark like a spider sensing vibrations on its web. He knows exactly how to exploit the vulnerabilities of his enemies. Meanwhile, the unseen fallout of his malicious actions is rippling outward, hitting Cassius Faison squarely in the chest. Cassius is being violently backed into a psychological corner, placed under intense, grueling interrogation and heavy suspicion. The metaphorical walls are closing in on him, the air in the interrogation room growing thinner and more toxic by the second as the authorities try to pin Sidwell's vanishing act on his shoulders. But then, the narrative shifts, and Dante Falconeri steps out of the shadows to defend Cassius. I watched that dynamic unfold, and it made me pause and rewind the moment in my head. Dante is fundamentally a man of the law, a detective who relies on hard evidence, procedural integrity, and sharp instinct. For him to stand as a human shield for Cassius in such a volatile, high-stakes environment means he sees something we don't. He sees the invisible strings pulling at Cassius's limbs, the hidden pressures that are forcing him into impossible choices. We are walking alongside these characters, trying to decipher who is the puppet and who is the puppeteer in this grand theater of deception. The pieces are shifting on the board, and Dante's protective, almost defiant stance is a crucial clue that the narrative we are being fed about Cassius is fundamentally incomplete. Dante knows that throwing Cassius to the wolves won't stop Sidwell. It will only give the true predator more time to perfect his deadly snare. As we move away from the sterile, tense environment of the police station and step into the opulent, suffocating halls of the Quartermaine mansion, the shadow beneath the story becomes even more pronounced and impossible to ignore. Everyone is currently focused on the visible fireworks. Tracy Quartermaine going head-to-head with Brooke Lynn. The tension in that house is palpable, the accusations flying through the air like shattered glass. Tracy is furious, her authoritative voice demanding answers, while Brooke Lynn is playing a highly dangerous game of withholding the absolute truth. On the surface, It looks like standard, albeit explosive, family warfare, the kind of bitter generational clash we have seen 100 times before. But there is a hidden emotional conflict here, a deeply rooted, almost primal battle for control and legacy that goes far beyond a frame driver or a dramatically staged accident in a shallow fountain. And right in the dead center of this raging tempest is Willow Kane. Willow is no longer just a passive bystander or a victim of circumstance. She has evolved into an active, calculating participant in this chaotic environment. But the specific detail that completely reorients this entire dynamic is Jack Brennan pulling Willow into a private negotiation. Why Brennan? Why now, of all times? It doesn't seem accidental in the slightest. Brennan is a man who operates exclusively in the grayest areas of morality. A man who trades in leverage, whispered secrets, and dangerous favors. For him to approach Willow for a calculated negotiation means he recognizes a hidden darkness, or perhaps a ruthless utility in her that others are simply too blind or too sentimental to see. There is an unseen connection forming here, a silent, potentially toxic pact being forged in the dark shadows of the Quartermain Civil War. It makes you wonder what Willow is truly willing to sacrifice to secure her position on the board. This brings us to the most delicate and terrifying part of the puzzle. Maybe there's another layer here that we are entirely overlooking. Ross Cullum has just received a piece of highly valuable intelligence, a golden ticket of information that could blow his ongoing investigation wide open and change the trajectory of multiple lives. Almost simultaneously, in a separate but equally tense environment, Lulu Spencer stumbles upon a deeply shocking piece of information of her own. Two separate people walking two separate paths, both suddenly colliding with explosive, reality-altering secrets. I keep wondering whether these two isolated pieces of intelligence are actually two halves of the same terrifying map. The timing is simply too perfect to be dismissed as mere coincidence. What if we're missing something crucial about the timeline and the geography of this threat? The quiet whispers and the shifting clues suggest that Lulu's shocking discovery is directly tied to the fate of Rocco Falconeri and Britt Westbourne. We know they are out there, running on fumes, hiding from shadows, completely isolated from the safety and resources of Port Charles. They are surviving on pure adrenaline and sheer willpower. It is entirely possible that the intelligence Cullum received is the exact location of the ruthless hunters tracking them, while Lulu's discovery is the devastating reality of what those hunters are truly capable of once they close the distance. Maybe the trap Sidwell set isn't just for the prominent figures in the city. Maybe the trap is already closing around Rocco and Britt in the unforgiving wilderness, pulling tight around their ankles while we are distracted by the noise back home. The tension in Port Charles is no longer just an abstract concept. It is a physical, suffocating weight pressing down on the shoulders of every single character. You can feel it most acutely in the way Trina Robinson is quietly considering her next move. She is surrounded by escalating family conflict, the deafening noise of everyone else's drama, threatening to drown out her own life and her own ambitions. Trina is standing at a critical crossroads, her eyes scanning the uncertain horizon, knowing that whatever decision she makes next will irrevocably alter her trajectory. She represents the viewer in this exact moment, watching the dark storm clouds gather in the distance, feeling the static electricity in the air, and knowing deep down that standing still is no longer a viable option. She has to move, but every path seems lined with hidden thorns. The profound sense of dread continues to mount exponentially as we look toward the end of the week. The narrative whispers tell us that Rocco is going to make a horrifying discovery. They don't tell us what it is. They don't tell us if it involves Britt's survival, or the twisted identity of the people hunting them, or something entirely worse that we haven't even conceived yet. But the utter lack of concrete details only serves to amplify the terror. Imagine being Rocco, for a second, isolated, physically exhausted, emotionally drained, turning a dark corner in the dense woods, or pushing open a rusted, creaking door in an abandoned cabin, and finding a truth so dark and so visceral that it shatters his entire reality. The suspense is absolutely agonizing. It feels like we are walking right behind him in the freezing cold, holding our breath, our hearts pounding in our chests, just waiting for the inevitable scream that we know is coming. Something feels unfinished. In fact, everything about this current landscape feels deeply, unsettlingly unfinished. This week is not a neat chapter closing with a bow tied on top. It is a giant, treacherous chessboard where more than half the pieces are hidden entirely in the thick fog. We have Sidwell's invisible, deadly tripwires, waiting patiently to snap. We have Valentine's eerie, artificial surrender masking what I firmly believe is a catastrophic, world-ending counterattack. We have Dante stubbornly guarding Cassius from a relentless system that wants to devour him whole, and Brennan slowly, methodically wrapping his dark influence around Willow's ambitions. And out in the freezing cold, far away from any help, we have Rocco walking straight into a living nightmare without a flashlight. The more I think about it, the more I realize that we are only seeing the distorted reflections on the surface of the water, completely oblivious to the massive, ancient monsters swimming silently in the depths below. We are not going to get clean answers today. We are not going to see the board clearly anytime soon. All we can do is keep walking down this dark, winding hallway together, running our hands along the cold walls to feel for hidden doors, and listening intently to the heavy footsteps echoing just out of sight. The game is far from over, guys. The pieces are merely holding their breath, waiting for the master trap to finally spring. And when it does, I can promise you, absolutely nothing in Port Charles will ever be the same again.
Goodbye. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the GH Spoilers Daily channel.